the poisoned apple, the jealous queen, the 7 dwarfs, but with a twist of courage, friendship, and hope. This is the fairy tale you thought you knew, retold for today. Long ago, in a kingdom where the winters were gentle and the summers were bright, a queen sat by her window as the first snowflakes of the season drifted softly to the ground. She looked out at the falling snow and whispered a wish. If only I had a child as pure as the snow, as kind as sunlight, and with a heart full of courage, she prayed. Not long after, her wish was granted. She gave birth to a daughter whose skin was as fair as the falling snow, whose lips carried the blush of a rose, and whose hair shone as dark as ebony wood. The queen named her Snow White. For some years, the palace was filled with laughter and light. Snow White's mother taught her gentleness, kindness, and respect for all living things. But joy does not always last. When Snow White was still very young, the queen fell gravely ill and passed away, leaving behind a grieving king and a child too little to understand the depth of her loss. The king, after some time, married again. His new queen was strikingly beautiful, but her heart was proud and cold. She carried with her a curious treasure, a tall, silver-framed mirror that never clouded, never cracked, and spoke with a voice of its own. Few knew the truth. Inside the mirror was a spirit that whispered secrets, feeding vanity and jealousy like a creeping shadow. At first, the new queen smiled sweetly at Snow White, but her heart grew restless as the people of the kingdom praised the young princess. The girl was not only beautiful, but her kindness reached everyone, from the palace guards to the birds nesting in the garden trees. Wherever she went, she spread warmth and gentleness, and the people began to love her dearly. The queen noticed, and envy, once planted, began to grow. Snow White's childhood. Snow White grew into a thoughtful and curious child. She loved books of wisdom, and she spent long hours in the palace gardens, speaking to the birds and helping the gardeners with tender care. She was not spoiled, though she was a princess. When she saw children of the village, she often slipped them small gifts or shared her food. What made Snow White truly beloved was not her face but her heart. She once rescued a wounded dove and nursed it back to health. She would comfort servants when they were tired and would sit beside her father, reading stories aloud when he looked weary from ruling the land. The king often said with pride, "My daughter has the grace of her late mother." And though his words were full of love, they struck the step queen's heart with bitterness. Crystal Ball, the mirror's first whisper. One morning, the queen stood before her tall mirror. She had grown used to asking it a single question: "Mirror, mirror, tall and bright, who is fairest in my sight?" The mirror usually answered, "You, my queen." But on this day, the mirror's surface shimmered like water, and the spirit's hollow voice replied, "You are fair, O queen so proud. But Snow White shines beyond the crowd." The queen's lips grew pale. "Snow White? A child?" The mirror hummed, "Not only beauty, but heart as well. She is loved, while you are feared." The queen trembled. She slammed the mirror shut, but its echoing laugh followed her. For the first time, she realized the people's admiration for Snow White was not simply about her looks. It was her kindness, her brightness, her gentle soul. And in the queen's proud heart, that was the most dangerous beauty of all. Evergreen tree into the forest. Not long after this, Snow White asked her father if she might spend a day in the forest beyond the palace walls. She wanted to see the wildflowers blooming at the edge of spring. The king, though worried, agreed, and sent guards to protect her. Snow White skipped ahead, marveling at the bright mosses and listening to the cheerful songs of sparrows. Her heart was full of wonder. It was there, in a sunlit clearing, that she heard the sound of hooves. A young prince from a neighboring kingdom, riding through the forest on his chestnut horse, drew his reins when he saw her. Snow White stepped back, startled, but the prince dismounted and bowed politely. "Forgive me," he said kindly. "I did not mean to frighten you. The forest is not often graced by such cheerful voices. I thought perhaps a fairy was singing." Snow White laughed softly. "Not a fairy, only a girl who loves the woods." The prince smiled. He was young, only a little older than she, and carried no air of arrogance. They walked a short while together, speaking of simple things: the beauty of the forest, the flight of birds, the kindness that rulers owe their people. When the guards approached, Snow White parted from him politely, unsure if she would ever see him again. But something about their meeting left a spark of hope in her heart. The prince mounted his horse once more and rode on, yet he looked back once with a smile that Snow White did not forget. New moon, the queen's jealousy grows. Back in the palace, the queen's envy deepened. She noticed the villagers' laughter when Snow White passed by. She saw the sparkle in the king's eyes when his daughter spoke. And she heard whispers from traveling courtiers of a young prince who had seen the princess and spoken highly of her. One night, unable to endure her thoughts, the queen crept again before the mirror. Mirror, mirror, tall and bright, who is fairest in my sight? The spirit answered without pause, though you are fair, O queen so vain, Snow White's light shall always reign. The queen's fingers tightened against the silver frame. She could not silence the mirror, nor the truth it spoke. And in her jealous heart, a terrible thought began to grow, a thought that would soon place Snow White's life in danger. The queen could not rest. Every day she saw Snow White's goodness shine brighter, and every day the mirror's words echoed louder in her ears. Jealousy wrapped around her heart like a creeping vine. At last she summoned a trusted huntsman from the palace guard. He was tall, strong, and loyal, but kind at heart. Take the princess into the deep forest, the queen ordered coldly. Say you are showing her new paths. When no one is near, silence her forever. Bring me proof that she will never return. The huntsman bowed, but when he left her chambers, his steps were heavy. His heart recoiled at the thought. Snow White had always spoken kindly to him, thanking him when he carried her father's messages or helped her mount her horse. She was gentle even with the smallest creatures. How could he harm her? Evergreen tree, the escape into the forest. The next morning, the huntsman told Snow White that the queen wished her to see a secret part of the woods, filled with flowers and deer. Excited, Snow White followed without suspicion. They walked until the palace was far behind. Birds chirped above them, and sunlight streamed through the tall trees. But the huntsman's face grew darker with each step. At last, trembling, he dropped to his knees before her. Princess, he cried, forgive me. I cannot obey the queen's command. She ordered me to take your life, but I would sooner give up my own than harm you. Flee into the forest, for you are no longer safe in the palace. Snow White gasped, her eyes wide with fear and sorrow. Yet she did not grow angry with the huntsman. Instead, she laid a gentle hand on his shoulder. You have shown mercy, she said softly. May kindness guard you always. With that, she turned and ran into the forest, tears stinging her eyes, her heart pounding like a drum. Shedding Tree, the forest of wonder. The forest was vast and strange. At first it frightened her. The trees loomed high and their shadows danced like giants. But as she slowed her steps, Snow White began to notice the gentler signs of life. A rabbit darting into its burrow, a deer lifting its head from a stream, fireflies twinkling like little lanterns. Though she was alone, the forest did not seem cruel. It felt alive, as if it were whispering comfort to her. At sunset, weary and lost, she stumbled upon a small clearing. There stood a most unusual cottage, tiny, with a roof thatched with moss and a garden full of herbs and bright flowers. Its windows glowed with warm light. Snow White, too tired to wonder long, knocked softly on the door. Would the 7 dwarfs? The door creaked open to reveal the most curious sight. Inside the cottage stood 7 small people, each no taller than a child, yet clearly grown. Their faces were kind, and each seemed to carry a special spark about him. One wore spectacles and held a book close to his chest. Another's hands were stained with paint and clay. A third carried a pouch of herbs that smelled sweet and healing. Others bore tools, flutes, or tiny hammers. Goodness, cried one, a princess at our door? Snow White, exhausted but polite, curtsied. Forgive me for troubling you. I am lost, with nowhere to go. May I rest here for the night? The dwarfs looked at one another, then smiled. Of course, said the eldest, the one with the book. But you must know, this cottage is no ordinary home. Each of us has a gift, and together we guard this forest from harm. Snow White's eyes brightened. Then perhaps I may help you, too. I may not have great powers, but I have willing hands and a loving heart." The dwarfs were charmed. They welcomed her with bread and soup, and soon her laughter filled the cottage as though she had lived there all her life. Blossom a new life in the cottage. Days turned into weeks. Snow White swept the little house, tended the garden, and sang to the birds that perched on the windowsill. The dwarfs grew to adore her, for she brought warmth to their home. She also learned from them. The healer taught her how to use herbs to soothe wounds. The musician taught her songs of the forest. The inventor showed her clever tools. And the storyteller shared wisdom from old times. Snow White bloomed, not only in beauty but in knowledge and courage. The forest creatures gathered near her, as though sensing her gentle spirit. To them, she became like a guardian. Crystal Ball the Queen's fury. Meanwhile, back at the palace, the Queen once again demanded of her mirror. "Mirror, mirror, tall and bright, who is fairest in my sight?" The mirror rippled and replied, "You, my Queen, are fair indeed. But Snow White lives, in the forest freed." The Queen's eyes blazed. "Alive?" she hissed. "That fool of a huntsman betrayed me." The mirror's spirit chuckled cruelly. "Her kindness shields her, and the forest itself hides her. If you wish her gone, you must use cunning." And so the Queen began to weave her plans. Older person the disguise. Disguising herself as a poor peddler woman, the Queen wrapped a shawl over her head and filled a basket with silk laces. Her beauty was hidden behind wrinkles and bent shoulders. None would guess her true form. She traveled deep into the woods until she found the dwarf's cottage. Snow White was alone, for the dwarfs had gone to work in the hills. "Good day, child," croaked the old woman. "Would you care for some fine laces? Strong and beautiful, they would suit you well." Snow White, never one to be rude, invited her in and admired the bright ribbons. They glimmered in the sunlight, red and gold. "Allow me to show you how they shine upon you," said the woman, tying the laces around Snow White's gown. But the Queen pulled them too tight, so tight that Snow White gasped and fell faint upon the floor. The Queen's eyes glittered with triumph. At last, her light is snuffed out. She hurried away, leaving the cottage silent. Dove saved by friendship. That evening, the dwarfs returned. To their horror they found Snow White lying pale and still. But the healer among them quickly understood. These laces are drawn too tight. She is not dead, only faint. With careful hands, they loosened the ribbons. Snow White gasped, her color returning as she opened her eyes. The dwarfs cheered with relief. But their joy turned to worry. "You must beware," the eldest warned. "The Queen has found you. Promise us, dear Snow White, that you will not open the door to any stranger." Snow White shivered, remembering the cruel tightness of the laces. "I promise," she said softly. Yet the Queen's envy was not finished. She would return again, darker and more dangerous than before. Snow White tried to be careful after the dwarfs saved her from the Queen's first trick. She kept her promise to not open the door to strangers, but her gentle heart still made her vulnerable. She could not imagine how far envy could reach. The Queen, however, would not rest. When the mirror once again declared Snow White the fairest, her fury shook the palace. "Mirror, mirror, tall and bright, who is fairest in my sight?" The spirit replied with a mocking laugh, "You are fair, O Queen so cold. But Snow White's beauty is brighter than gold." The Queen's hands clenched into fists. "If laces cannot silence her, then I shall try again. I will not fail." Person white hair the second disguise. Once more she cloaked herself, this time as an old woman selling combs. Her basket brimmed with shining trinkets, each made with her own cruel magic. She traveled to the dwarf's cottage and called out in a trembling voice, "Beautiful combs for your hair. A gift to make any girl shine brighter." Snow White remembered the dwarf's warning. She stayed at the window and answered politely, "I thank you, grandmother, but I need no combs today." The Queen pressed closer. "See how lovely this one is. A simple try will cost you nothing." Snow White hesitated. The comb was indeed beautiful, glittering with tiny gems. Her gentle heart wanted not to offend the old woman. At last she opened the door, only a little. The Queen moved quickly. She pressed the comb into Snow White's dark hair, and at once its poisoned magic spread. Snow White fell as though asleep, her breath shallow, her body heavy. The queen slipped away, certain that this time she had triumphed. Dove the dwarf's second rescue. When the dwarfs returned, they found her lying once again, pale and motionless. Their hearts broke with fear. The healer inspected her carefully. "This comb is enchanted," he cried. "Remove it quickly." The inventor rushed forward, pulling the comb from her hair. The instant it was gone, Snow White stirred and opened her eyes. The dwarfs wept with relief, but also with worry. "This cannot continue," the eldest dwarf said gravely. "The queen's envy is strong. Promise us, Snow White, never again to accept gifts from strangers." Snow White nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "I promise." I see now how cruel her heart has become. But the queen had not yet surrendered. Red Apple, the poisoned apple. Back at the palace, the queen raged before her mirror. "Mirror, mirror, tall and bright, who is fairest in my sight?" Once again, the spirit's voice whispered, "You are fair, O Queen of Might." But Snow White still shines with greater light. This time the queen's jealousy burned like fire. "Then I will craft a gift so perfect, so tempting, she cannot resist, and this time no one will save her." She conjured a single apple, half red as blood, half white as snow. To any eye it seemed the juiciest, sweetest fruit in the world. Yet half was poisoned, cursed to still the heart of whoever took a bite. Disguising herself as a kindly farmer's wife, she set out once more. Evergreen tree, the final trick. Snow White was sweeping the cottage when she heard a gentle knock. "Dear child," said the old woman's voice, "I bring the finest apples from my orchard. One taste will fill your heart with joy." Snow White shook her head firmly. "I may not take anything from strangers. Please forgive me." But the queen was clever. She smiled kindly. "See, I will cut the apple in two. You take the red half, I shall eat the white. What harm could come if we share?" Snow White hesitated. The woman looked so kind, and she herself had always loved apples. At last, against her better sense, she took the red half. The queen bit her white piece harmlessly, while Snow White bit into the red. At once the poison flowed through her. The apple fell from her hand, and she collapsed to the floor, silent and still. The queen's eyes gleamed with triumph. At last she believed she had won. She hurried back to the palace, her laughter echoing through the woods. New moon grief in the cottage. When the dwarfs returned and found Snow White lying lifeless, they were filled with sorrow deeper than words. "This time, no breath remains," whispered the healer. "No pulse beats in her wrist. She is gone." Tears flowed freely, yet even in grief, they could not bear to bury her. Snow White's body was so pure, her face so peaceful, it seemed as if she were only sleeping. So they built a coffin of clear glass, trimmed with gold, and laid her gently inside. They placed it in the forest glade, where sunlight and moonlight could fall upon her, and the creatures of the forest could keep her company. Days turned to weeks. The dwarfs visited often, singing songs of love and friendship. Birds nested nearby, as if keeping watch. Crown the Prince returns. One day, a familiar horse trotted into the clearing. It was the young Prince Snow White had met once in the forest. He had never forgotten her kindness, and when he heard rumors of a sleeping maiden guarded by dwarfs, he followed the trail. When he saw her lying in the glass coffin, his heart ached with sorrow. "Is this the gentle princess I once spoke with?" he asked softly. The dwarfs bowed their heads. "She is Snow White, the truest friend we ever had. The queen's envy has silenced her forever." The prince gazed at her, tears in his eyes. He whispered, "Dear princess, your kindness once touched me. I will honor you always." And as he bent to kiss her hand in farewell, a miracle stirred. The piece of poisoned apple, lodged in her throat, shifted. She coughed once, twice, and then drew a deep, trembling breath. Her eyes fluttered open. The dwarfs shouted with joy, dancing around her. The prince stepped back in astonishment, then knelt with reverence. "Snow White, you live." Snow White blinked, confused, but then smiled with wonder. "It seems kindness has guarded me after all." Glowing star justice and joy news of Snow White's awakening spread quickly. The king rejoiced, rushing to the forest to embrace his daughter. When the truth of the queen's cruelty became known, the people of the kingdom turned from her. The mirror, at last, cracked and shattered, freeing the spirit within. The queen fled, never to return, and her name was spoken only as a warning against pride and envy. Snow White returned to the palace, but she often visited the dwarfs, never forgetting their friendship. She continued to learn, to share kindness, and to bring light to the kingdom. The prince visited often, and their friendship grew stronger with each passing day. When the time was right, he asked for her hand, not for her beauty, but for her gentle and courageous heart. And Snow White, remembering his kindness, agreed with a smile. Together they ruled with wisdom, guided always by compassion. The kingdom flourished, for its rulers understood that true beauty is not in a face, but in a heart that chooses goodness. And so Snow White's story was told for generations, not as a tale of envy and sorrow, but as a reminder that kindness, courage, and love are the fairest gifts of all.